Welcome to today's story. After years of sacrifice, they told me the truth. You were never family. This isn't just a tale of betrayal. It's the raw confession of someone who gave everything to people he believed were his own. He cooked, cleaned, paid bills, and held their lives together quietly, loyally, hoping one day they'd see him as more than just the helper. But what happens when the truth surfaces and he realizes he was never part of the family, only a convenience? What follows is not just revenge, it's a powerful awakening. Let's dive in. Before we dive into the story, we'll love to thank you for your continued support to this channel. If you enjoy this story and stories like this, kindly subscribe and hit on the notification button so you don't miss any of our stories. We will love to hear from you. Tell us where you're watching from in the comments section. We'll love to give you a shout out in our next video. Now let's begin. I was never supposed to stay long. At least that's what I was told much later. But at age 5, when my mom dropped me off at Aunt Lydia's porch with a backpack, a crustless sandwich, and no goodbye hug, I thought I was going somewhere safe. I don't remember crying. Maybe I was too young to understand what was really happening. All I knew was that Aunt Lydia took me in, Uncle Marcus gave me a stiff nod, and I was handed a blanket that smelled like bleach and wood polish. That night, I curled up on the couch and tried to count the stars through a cracked window while the rest of the house laughed over some sitcom I wasn't invited to watch. They always set an extra plate. Always. As if that alone made me part of the family. But that plate came with conditions, silent ones. Dishes had to be done before I could eat. Chores needed to be finished before I could rest. If the other kids broke something, I'd be the one blamed for not watching closely. No matter how well I did in school, my report cards were skimmed, never framed. If I asked for something, they'd say, "We're already doing more than we should." But if their son, Derek, needed shoes or their daughter, Chloe, wanted piano lessons, it was done without question. I didn't mind not then. I just wanted to belong. And I thought if I kept showing up, kept being useful, maybe one day I would. By the time I was 14, I had learned to wake up before everyone else. I'd shovel the snow off the walkway, take out the trash, and make sure breakfast was at least half prepared, because Aunt Lydia hated wasting her energy in the mornings. At school, I worked harder than most kids, not because I was told to, but because I needed a reason to believe I mattered. I won math competitions, joined science fairs, even tutored Chloe through algebra while she rolled her eyes and called me boring. Every time I helped her, every time she passed a test, she'd get praised. "Good girl, Chloe," they'd cheer. "You're so smart." Not once did anyone say, "Thanks to him." It became a pattern, my silence feeding their comfort. They never asked how I felt, never wondered if I was okay. They assumed I was fine because I never complained. But that's the thing about quiet people. We don't speak until we're certain no one's listening anymore. And by then, we've already made up our minds. I got my first job at 16, mopping floors at a grocery store 3 towns away because I didn't want the neighbors to know. I used the money to help with bills voluntarily. Aunt Lydia would sigh dramatically about how expensive everything had become, and I'd offer her my envelope before she finished the sentence. She'd take it like it was expected and say, "That's the least you can do for all we've given you." And I believed her. I thought they were my family, and that sacrifice was love. It wasn't until college applications rolled around that I realized just how little I meant. I had a 4.0 GPA, perfect attendance, glowing recommendations. But when I asked if I could use our home address for my applications, Uncle Marcus said, "Are you sure you want to go around saying you're one of us?" The room fell silent. Even Derek looked uncomfortable. Aunt Lydia gave a tight smile and said, "It's just, technically, we're not your legal guardians. Maybe you should list your caseworker." That night, I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand how a house could be full of people and still feel like a void. But I still didn't leave. Instead, I decided to earn their approval the only way I knew how, by working harder. I applied for every scholarship, every grant, every part-time gig. I got accepted into a local college and promised to commute, just so I could keep helping at home. They let me stay in the garage, said it'd be better for everyone. I didn't argue. I installed insulation myself, slept beside gardening tools and old car tires, and told myself it was just temporary. Just until they saw I was worth keeping. When Derek got into some credit card debt, I used my savings to bail him out. When Chloe dropped out of nursing school and needed help with rent, I covered 2 months and even offered to tutor her again if she went back. And when Aunt Lydia fell ill for a few weeks, I took over everything, cooking, cleaning, errands, without being asked. Still, they never said thank you. Not once. And yet, I kept doing more. Because I thought that's what family did. Because I thought that if I gave enough, they'd love me back. Because I believed, foolishly, that I belonged. But all it really was an extra plate at the table. One that could be taken away without warning. One that never had my name on it to begin with. Derek's graduation felt like the final test. I'd spent weeks helping him prep for exams, staying up late to quiz him, even skipping a few of my own college classes to make sure he didn't fall behind. He wasn't dumb, just lazy, and deep down, I think he knew someone would always be there to clean up after him. That someone was me. Always me. I drove him to the ceremony, pressed his gown the night before, paid half the catering bill when Aunt Lydia accidentally went over budget, and even stayed up till 2 a.m. editing his valedictorian speech, only for him to later go with Chloe's version because hers had more jokes. Fine. I clapped anyway, smiled through it, pretended I didn't hear Chloe whisper to her friend, "He just doesn't know when to quit." The church hall was packed. String lights and balloons. Folded paper programs. A family photo booth in the corner. When I walked in, juggling trays of juice, Lydia waved me down out. Not to thank me, but to remind me that her brother's family was sitting in front and I needed to stay out of their way. I nodded, as usual, and headed to the back. It didn't bother me at first. I was used to being in the background. I always figured love didn't need to be loud. But something shifted that day. Something small. It wasn't the seat they gave me, it was what they took from me without even realizing it. Right before the group photo, someone, a photographer, I think, called out, "Let's get a picture of the whole family." I started walking toward the group. Lydia's hand gently touched my arm. "Just wait a second, honey," she said. "This one's just for the family." I froze. Derek looked over at me with the same blank expression he always had when he needed me to move out of his way. Chloe was fixing her lip gloss. Uncle Marcus pulled in Lydia for the shot. Nobody looked back. Nobody said, "Come join us." That was when I realized they didn't forget me. They excluded me. I stood there, still holding the spare phone they'd used to take pictures, still smiling like some stagehand behind the curtain, still hoping someone would pull me into the frame. But the camera clicked. They laughed. They moved on. The photo got printed on a thank you card a week later. Everyone had a copy. I didn't get one. After the ceremony, someone handed Derek the mic. He cleared his throat and began, "I want to thank everyone who shaped me into the man I am today." He mentioned Chloe, his classmates, his football coach, even his third-grade teacher. And of course, he added, to my amazing parents for always believing in me. I waited. My name never came. Later that night, someone tapped my shoulder and said, "Hey, are you the family's driver?" I didn't correct him. I just nodded, picked up a trash bag from a half-eaten table, and made my way toward the kitchen. Because the truth hit harder than any insult could. I had become a servant in a house where I once prayed to be a son. When most guests had left and the music died down, I stayed back to clean. Chloe breezed past me in heels and tossed a half-finished wine cup into the bin I was holding. "You missed a few under the dessert table," she said, like I was staff. Like I hadn't once pulled all-nighters to tutor her. Like I wasn't the reason she even passed high school math. "Thanks," I replied, keeping my voice steady. Before I left that night, I went to the coat rack, where my jacket still hung, creased, forgotten. In the pocket was a card I'd written for Derek. No money inside, just words. Honest ones. I'd planned to give it to him after the ceremony, but I tore it up right there. dropped the pieces in the same bin Chloe had used. I walked home in the dark, alone, even though the lights in their car were still on. Even though there was space for one more. Even though they passed me on the road and didn't stop. They were laughing inside that car. And I realized so was I. Because something inside me broke that night, yes. But something else was waking up too. A quiet part of me. The part that had spent years begging for scraps of affection, hoping they'd see me. That part stood up inside me. It looked around at the silence and the loneliness and whispered, "You've done enough." That was the last night I ever called them family in my heart. I never planned to snoop. It wasn't in my nature to pry into things that weren't mine. But that evening, the house was deathly quiet. Aunt Lydia tucked away in her room with the curtains drawn. Uncle Marcus buried himself in newspaper crosswords at the kitchen table, and Derek and Chloe off celebrating Derek's big day with friends. I was folding laundry in the hallway when I spotted a small, leather-bound book sticking out from under Chloe's bedroom door. It looked so out of place. The edges were frayed, the lock broken, and the cover creased with use. I hesitated, thumb hovering over the clasp, breathing in the faint scent of lavender paper. I told myself it was curiosity. I justified it by thinking maybe it was Chloe's school journal, something innocent. But as soon as I opened it, I realized this was far from harmless. The first entry was dated 2 months ago, shortly after I paid Derek's rent when he'd gotten evicted for skipping too many payments. The handwriting was Chloe's. Angular, confident, each loop in her cursive accentuated with careless swirls. She wrote, "He's the perfect wallet. We feed off him, blame him when things go wrong, and he never speaks up. If he did, he'd be shown the door. But as long as we treat him like our fixer, he'll keep coming back." My heart pounded so loud I thought someone would hear it. I turned the page. Tonight, Aunt Lydia whispered she'd drop his caseworker address on his college apps. She said no college in their right mind needed a charity case. The words burned on the page like acid. Every sentence confirmed what I'd felt that night at graduation, that I was disposable, a silent business arrangement, and not a person they loved. With each entry I read, I felt the final strands of loyalty unraveling, replaced by raw, bitter clarity. I flipped further. The entries went back nearly a year. Notes on how much I'd contributed each month, reminders of which repairs I'd made around the house, and lists of tasks I'd completed. There were laugh-out-loud comments about me recruiting extra shifts at the grocery store so we didn't bankrupt the household, and promises to keep him comfortable but not too comfortable. The cruel irony stung me worse than any outright insult could. I'd been proud of my sacrifices. I told myself I was doing it out of love. Love for people who raised me and sheltered me. But in their eyes, I wasn't family. I was a project, a problem solver, a stepping stone to Derek's diploma and Chloe's scholarship. The more I read, the more I saw a family portrait painted in lies, each brushstroke carved to keep me in my place. When I reached the last entry, dated just 2 nights before, there was a plan laid out. Aunt Lydia worried about Aunt Ruth getting wind of my inheritance from my biological grandmother. It said, "We need to move fast. If he finds out, he'll want to claim what's his. And then we'll be stuck with lawyer fees. I say sell the house and split the profit quietly. He'll be gone by then." My breath caught in my throat. I didn't know whether to feel anger or relief. The anger came fast. I'd been used, then lied to, and now they were plotting to cut me out of something that was rightfully mine. But the relief was deeper. I realized I held the power now. They might have treated me like an extra plate, but I was no longer hungry for their scraps. I closed the diary, slid it back under the door, and walked away without looking back. I felt light, as though I'd dropped a heavy backpack I hadn't known I was carrying. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my small apartment, once the insulated garage lights off, listening to the city humming beyond the walls. I thought about how I had given them everything. My childhood, my teenage summers, my blood, sweat, and tears. And they still saw me as a tool. But as the hours crept by, I began sketching out my own plans, plans that no one could touch. I'd incorporate the inheritance money into a business of my own. I'd buy property and hire people who appreciated my work. I'd help others like me, people who'd given so much but were never seen. I realized that my generosity wasn't the weakness I'd believed it to be, it was my greatest strength. It was the foundation on which I'd rebuild my life. By dawn, I was resolved. I would confront them, but on my terms. I would expose every lie and every betrayal. I would reclaim what was mine and ensure they never again treated me like an option. I slipped a copy of my birth certificate and a lawyer's card into an envelope, planning the next moves with precision. The quiet satisfaction of knowing that I had unmasked the truth filled me with a steadiness I'd never felt before. For the first time since I arrived at Aunt Lydia's porch as a child, I felt fully alive and entirely in control. I didn't explode. I didn't scream or flip tables or storm out like some character in a soap opera. No, my revenge would be built the way I had lived. Quietly, consistently, and with purpose. The moment I closed Chloe's diary and slipped back into my makeshift apartment, the switch flipped. It wasn't just about getting even. It was about taking back everything I'd given without question, my time, my labor, my money, my heart. I had always made things easier for them. This time, I would make it easier for myself. I would start by cutting the cord, and I'd do it so cleanly they wouldn't even realize they were bleeding until it was too late. The house was still legally in my name. Uncle Marcus, years ago, had asked me to help refinance after falling behind on mortgage payments. At the time, I thought it was the honorable thing to do. He couldn't get approved on his own, so I'd stepped in, co-signed, paid down the balance, and secured it under my credit. I'd assumed we'd eventually work something out, but there was no paperwork, no record of them ever taking over ownership. The title still bore my name, and now that small technicality was going to be my liberation. I spent the next week setting things in motion. Quietly, I visited a lawyer downtown, an old contact from college who had once offered help if I ever needed it. I showed him the title, the diary entries I'd photographed, the inheritance notice I'd received but never shared with the family. His expression didn't change much as he listened, but when I finished, he leaned forward and said, "You've been patient long enough. It's time you stop asking for permission." The first thing we did was transfer full ownership of the house to my name on paper. No loopholes, no family deals, no verbal promises. I filed it quietly. Then I opened a trust with the funds from my grandmother's estate, something Aunt Lydia clearly never wanted me to know about, and locked it down tight. No one else would touch it. I also closed the shared utility accounts I'd been unknowingly paying for water, gas, electricity, everything tied to my name. Then I rerouted the payments to a new account, and when the bills came, they'd be in for a surprise. But it wasn't just about the money. It was about the message. About showing them I wasn't their background character anymore. Chloe came knocking one afternoon while I was moving boxes out of the garage. She stood there with her usual smirk, phone in hand, acrylic nails tapping against the screen. "Mom said the water got cut off," she said, like I had forgotten to pay the tab at a restaurant. She asked if you could take care of it before dinner. Also, the internet's being weird again. I didn't even pause. I looked her straight in the eye and said, "You'll need to speak with the landlord." She frowned. "What?" I pointed to the house. "That home is under new management now, and I no longer live there." Her brows lifted. "Are you trying to be funny?" I set the last box in the car and calmly replied, "No, Chloe. I'm done playing roles in your family script. I've resigned." She looked like she wanted to say something else, but she couldn't form the words. For the first time ever, she didn't have a comeback. She just stared as I slid into the car and drove off. No argument, no goodbye, no apology from her lips. Just silence. By evening, Uncle Marcus called. I let it ring. Then Aunt Lydia sent a string of messages. "Call me now. Where's the water? Why are there notices from the bank? I thought we had an agreement." I didn't respond. I owed them nothing, not even an explanation. I had served them for 2 decades. This was my quiet notice of resignation, and my final duty had already been fulfilled, showing them who they were without me. The following week, I officially listed the house for sale. I didn't have to tell them. I was the sole owner. My lawyer handled the eviction process with meticulous precision. A letter arrived at the house on a Wednesday afternoon. I heard from a neighbor that Aunt Lydia collapsed in a chair when she read it. Derek apparently tried to call me 6 times. Chloe left a voicemail sobbing, suddenly remembering all the good things we had shared. I didn't delete the messages. I just didn't listen to them either. I was already gone. I moved into a small but beautiful apartment near the lake, sunlight spilling through the windows, silence that didn't feel heavy, and air that didn't reek of obligation. I bought myself a real bed, new clothes, even a vintage record player. For the first time, I decorated my space without having to ask permission or worry if it matched anyone else's taste. I was free, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually. I was no longer someone's crutch. I was standing on my own, and the ground beneath me had never felt sturdier. They came to me when the lights went out. It was a gray Saturday afternoon when the knock came. Not just one knock, but a pounding rhythm that rattled the hallway of my apartment building. I didn't need to check the peephole. I already knew. The messages, the missed calls, the sudden voicemails filled with cracked voices and forced affection, they had all led to this. I opened the door slowly, calmly, and there they were, Aunt Lydia in her Sunday coat and pearls, mascara slightly smudged from tears she clearly hadn't intended for me. Uncle Marcus stood behind her, shoulders tense, arms folded, wearing the same stern face he used when blaming me for things Derek did. And beside them was Chloe, chin tilted up, sunglasses on even indoors like she was clinging to dignity. Aunt Lydia didn't wait for permission to speak. She pushed forward, her voice shrill and trembling. How could you? After everything we did for you, how could you sell our home? I repeated, folding my arms. Funny choice of words. Marcus stepped in. We raised you. We took you in. You fed me because the government gave you money to do it, I snapped. You clothed me because you needed a maid, not a son. Don't stand here acting like saints in a story where I was always the servant. Chloe scoffed. So what? You're better than us now? You think just because you've got your little apartment and your shiny new life, you can erase what we've been through together? I let out a breath I'd been holding for years. You're right. I can't erase the past, but I can stop paying for it. Aunt Lydia's lips trembled. We were family. That house had memories, Christmases, birthdays, none of them mine, I said. I was always behind the camera, always doing the dishes, always invisible in the pictures. They didn't reply. Maybe because they knew I was right. Maybe because they never realized how obvious it had all become once I stopped pretending not to notice. I read the diary. I added, the one Chloe left on the floor. I know everything. The fixer, the perfect wallet, the plan to sell the house behind my back. I was your investment, not your family. Chloe flinched. Aunt Lydia looked like she'd been slapped. Marcus stayed stone-faced, but his eyes flickered, just once. You were going to cut me out of everything and then vanish, I said. So don't act surprised that I made the first move. Marcus finally broke his silence. We made sacrifices too. No, I said quietly. You made use of me. That's not the same thing. There was a pause. One of those long, empty ones where everyone's thinking but no one dares speak the truth. Then Lydia took a step forward. Listen, maybe we didn't do everything right. Maybe we got carried away. But we can work something out. If you just take the house off the market, I raised my hand to stop her. This isn't a negotiation. I gave everything to that home and the people in it. Time, money, myself. And in return, I got silence, blame, and backhanded gratitude. Chloe's voice was small now. You're really not going to help us? I stared at her for a long time, then said the words I'd been waiting to say since the graduation night. No, Chloe. This time, ask your real family. I watched their faces shift, shock, disbelief, then something that looked like grief. But it wasn't grief over losing me. It was grief over losing control, over losing a resource, over realizing that the quiet boy who once begged to be seen had finally turned away. And this time, for good. "I'll have security escort you out of the building if you don't leave now," I said evenly. "This conversation is over." Aunt Lydia's hand trembled, and she reached out toward me. I stepped back. That's when it hit her, that I wasn't bluffing, that the boy she once told to eat quietly or skip dinner had grown into a man who no longer needed her table. She turned without another word. Marcus followed. Chloe lingered, lips slightly parted as if waiting for me to say something, to give her a piece of the old me she could guilt into coming back. I said nothing. She left last. When the door closed, I didn't cry. I didn't feel triumphant. What I felt was peace. A clean kind of peace. The kind you only find when you finally stop begging to be loved by people who were never capable of it. After they left, I stood in the center of my apartment and just listened to nothing. No yelling from another room. No footsteps reminding me I was in someone else's space. Just peace. I made tea, not because someone asked, but because I wanted it. I sat by the window, watching the lake reflect the last stretch of afternoon sun, and realized something odd. I didn't feel alone. Not the kind of alone that empties you out. This was different. This was the kind of solitude that fills you with clarity. I'd spent years aching to be accepted into a family that only saw me as their backup plan. And now that they were gone, I could finally hear my own voice. A few days later, I received an envelope in the mail. Thick, cream-colored, no return address, just my full name handwritten across the front. I opened it slowly, curious. Inside was a letter. The handwriting was familiar. At the bottom, the name Miriam Belgrave was signed in a shaky hand. My birth mother. The woman who left me on Aunt Lydia's porch when I was 5. I sat down as the air thickened around me, and I read every word. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't try to rewrite the past. Instead, she explained. She'd been sick, mentally and emotionally unwell. She had left me not because she didn't love me, but because she thought I'd have a better shot without her. She hadn't realized the family she left me with would strip me of more than my name. They'd strip me of my worth. She said she'd tried to reach out when I was 13, but Aunt Lydia had blocked her attempts. And when my grandmother passed and left a portion of her estate for me, Aunt Lydia had tried to intercept that too. I sat with the letter for a long time, hands shaking. Not from anger, but from revelation. It was never just neglect. It was theft. Theft of identity, of love, of opportunity. But Miriam didn't ask for anything. She simply ended the letter with, "I don't expect you to come find me. I only ask that you know the truth, that someone out there did love you once, and still does." I folded the letter carefully, placed it in a drawer beside my bed, and stared at the wall for hours. I didn't cry. I just breathed. 2 weeks later, I booked a ticket. I found her in a small town 3 hours away, living in a modest assisted living facility. She walked with a cane, her hair streaked with silver, her eyes smaller than I remembered. But when she saw me, she smiled. Not because she needed something from me, not because I could pay her bills, but because she recognized me. "You're taller than I imagined," she whispered as I hugged her. That night, we sat and talked like strangers who had always known each other. She asked me about my life. I told her everything. Well, almost everything. She didn't need to hear about the pain Lydia and the others caused. That chapter was already closed. Instead, we talked about books, about places she wanted to visit but never could, about my plans for the future. She listened, really listened. And for the first time in years, I felt what I'd never truly known, a sense of being rooted, of being someone's son, not someone's tool. In the weeks that followed, I began building a new version of family. Not with blood, necessarily, but with people who saw me. I volunteered at youth shelters. I started a small tutoring program for kids in the foster system. I met others who had been discarded, misused, ignored, and with every conversation, I understood more about myself. My past wasn't a curse. It was a seed. And now, I was finally choosing where to plant it. When the house finally sold, I didn't celebrate. I donated a portion to a charity that helped teens aging out of the system, kids like me, who needed a break. The rest I used to open a creative workspace in the city, free for underprivileged students who wanted to study, create, or just escape for a while. I called it the extra plate. Fitting, I thought, because for so long I was that extra plate placed at the table but never served with love. Now, I was making sure no one else had to sit in that cold, quiet space feeling invisible. One day, I received a message from Chloe. Just 5 words. "I'm sorry. Please call me." I read it, then deleted it, because I had nothing more to say. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't looking for revenge. I had already won. Not by shouting, not by punishing, but by walking away and never looking back. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who's ever felt unseen or undervalued. On this channel, we tell stories that speak to strength, truth, and finding peace after betrayal. Thanks for listening, and remember, your worth isn't defined by who fails to recognize it. It's defined by how you rise beyond them.